Wow. Wow. Look at us. Look at us. So I see it's sort of standing room only. I haven't got an official count yet, but looking at the size of the room and the people in the room, this may be our biggest convention and leadership conference ever. I know there are people in this room who were probably on a bus 24 hours ago from, I don't know, Lame Deer or Billings. And there are folks here who got up way before the crack of dawn this morning and braved thunderstorms and bad traffic to get to downtown Seattle here. And I just couldn't be more impressed by the diversity in this room of all sorts. We've got translation into a number of different languages. We've got people here from the edge of North Dakota and the edge of the Pacific Ocean. And it's just a beautiful thing to see you all here. So I just want to say we have had an amazing year at SEIU 775, and today we've got many victories to celebrate. In Washington State, the legislature funded a new contract for individual provider home care aides, negotiated last year by a rank-and-file bargaining committee under the leadership of our Secretary-Treasurer, Adam Glickman. I am thrilled to be able to report that there is no home care contract better than ours in the entire nation. The contract includes raises for everyone of at least 5% this year and next year. And for the first time, home care workers at the top tier of the salary scale will be making $15 an hour. We protected health care, paid time off, dental and vision coverage, L&I, and mileage reimbursement. We also protected parity for our agency providers that has already translated into major contract victories in the private sector. We've launched nursing home contract campaigns that are making headway in improving standards in every facility. We have recommitted to growth in Montana and are partnering with allies to bring affordable health care to every woman, man, and child in that state. None of it would have been possible were it not for our biggest victories of last year, holding politicians accountable to caregivers and electing pro-worker governors in Washington State and in Montana. Now, we challenged candidates in both states to commit to walking a day in a caregiver's shoes, to commit to improving funding for long-term care, and to commit to specific policies to improve the lives of caregivers. The hard work that we put in knocking on doors, making phone calls, attending lobby days, writing emails, talking to other members, and talking to legislators made these victories possible. No other union did as much to help elect Governor Jay Inslee and Governor Steve Bullock as SEIU 775. We made nearly 500,000 phone calls. 500,000 volunteer phone calls, knocked on tens of thousands of doors, and delivered hundreds of thousands of votes. Now, we didn't do that because we thought they were nice guys, or because they belonged to one political party instead of another, or because they posed for the camera wearing a purple t-shirt. We did it because of the commitments they had made to share in the long-term endeavor of lifting caregivers out of poverty, once and for all. Now, this hardly means that our work in Olympia and Helena is over. Of course not. As you'll be hearing over the next 2 days, our fight to win back hours for home care clients and better benefits and staffing for nursing home workers is far from over. We've got to return to our state capitals next year, ready to tell our stories about how the work we do sustains, protects, supports, and empowers our patients, residents, clients, and consumers to become healthier, more independent, and improves the quality of life for the most vulnerable among us. But it's not even the whole story, because we also know that when low-wage workers earn more money, it helps our whole economy. Prosperity doesn't trickle down from wealthy business people and corporations. Prosperity comes from us, from caregivers and other working people. When caregivers and other low-wage workers do better, the whole economy does better. I mean, just think about it. If you give a tax break to a billionaire, the chances are, what happens to that money? Well, the chances are it gets invested in some complex, risky financial instrument on Wall Street, or it gets sent to a Swiss bank account, or tucked away at a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. But when low-wage workers earn more money, they spend it in the local economy. They buy food, they buy medicine, they buy school supplies and other basic household necessities. And what that does, guess what? Is it creates jobs for people who manufacture, transport goods, or provide services. That's why even as our union has accomplished remarkable victories for caregivers, we've also served as a driving force behind some of the innovative low-wage organizing campaigns in the nation. In SeaTac and Seattle, for example, we are supporting low-wage airport and fast food workers as they make national headlines by demanding living wages and the right to organize. At SeaTac Airport, just 15 years ago, baggage handlers, fuelers, ramp workers, and other airline service workers earned a living wage, a pension, and health care. But today, those jobs now pay minimum wages without benefits, forcing communities to pay the price in lower pay, lower expectations, and lower horizons for economic growth. Families stretch poverty wages into a household budget. Cities with thousands of poverty wage jobs suffer as businesses close and schools struggle. At SeaTac, low-wage airport workers have united to say it doesn't have to be that way. Corporations may be greedier, but nothing has changed about what families and communities need. Nothing has changed about the importance of respecting work and honoring workers. And nothing has changed about the fact that when workers have more money, they spend more money. That's as obvious to workers as it is to the woman who runs the local food bank, as it is to the small business owner. And that's why all of these community leaders have come together with the backing of our union and many of our partners to move the SeaTac Jobs Initiative to the ballot. Voters in SeaTac will have an opportunity to choose a new path forward to ensure that the major airlines, hotels, and airline subcontractors that do well in that community have to do right by that community by providing good jobs, including paid sick leave, the opportunity for full-time work, job security, and a living wage of $15 an hour. Now, if that measure passes, it will ripple across the country, showing that there's another way forward to create good jobs, reboot the economy, hold giant corporations accountable, and fight income inequality. And that's not all. On May 30th, striking fast food workers in Seattle joined an incredible new national movement which spread from fast food chain to fast food chain across the city, seizing the public's imagination by calling the question, how can we build a sustainable economy when the fastest growing jobs are also the lowest wage jobs? And just last week, the movement spread from fast food workers to baristas and from Seattle to Tacoma and Missoula and beyond as part of a national day of action. And when Seattle workers rallied after a long day of strike lines and protests last Thursday, they were joined by candidates for mayor and city council. And instead of the workers begging the candidates for support, the candidates were competing against each other to see who could commit to do more to lift up low-wage workers and reclaim prosperity for all of us. Now, that's what we need. And it only happened with the leadership of our union. I'm so proud of all that our union has accomplished this year. But this convention is not just a celebration of our accomplishments. We have so much work to do here this weekend and throughout the coming year. Now, last year, as we celebrated our 10th anniversary of our chartering as a local union, our executive board created a committee of union members to review lessons from our union's history and strategize the future over the next 10 years. After months of research, discussion, and debate, this committee, called the Vision 2022 Committee, has developed a set of proposals that I hope will chart a course for the next decade of our union's work and fundamentally repurpose and revolutionize our local union. In keeping with our tradition of innovative and ambitious goals and strategies, the Vision 2022 Committee's recommendations will challenge our union to look beyond ourselves, to lift caregivers out of poverty, and to raise every voice, union and non-union, inside and outside our current industries and geographies, to create a just and humane world where everyone shares in the prosperity of our economy. That's right. But I just want to reflect for a few moments before we talk about that on how far we've come as a union over the past decade. The stories that we heard this morning, the incredible testimonials, the wonderful video clips, but especially the personal stories, remind us where we've come from and how far we've come. We remember that before 2000, there wasn't any union for long-term care in Washington or Montana. What home care workers like Janet Rodriguez and Linda Lee decided to do was take a lesson here from the home care organizing campaign in Los Angeles that won for 74,000 workers in 1999, and to do here in Washington what we did there. Now, the difference was that because SEIU members nationally adopted what was called the New Strength Unity Plan at our 2000 convention, raising their dues and restructuring the entire national union to support new industry organizing, we had the resources and capacity to do here in 18 months what it took the workers over a decade to do in Los Angeles. Now, today, as a result of the passion and commitment and ambitions of thousands of home care and nursing home workers who took such significant risk and invested immeasurable time and energy, I'm proud to say we have created one of the most ambitious, powerful, and innovative local unions in the entire country. We heard those stories and that history in the voices that were raised here this morning. And as Sterling and Adam talked about in 2008 and for several years thereafter, when Wall Street, banks, and big corporations broke the economy and asked taxpayers for bailout, even while they foreclosed on our homes and caused widespread layoffs, unemployment, and economic depression, our union stood strong and prevented the worst of the proposed cuts to long-term care and health care services. Today, with our newest contracts, we are emerging once again to lead the nation in wage and benefit standards for caregivers. We have grown in our decade from 1,600 dues-paying members in December of 2002, our first month, to 43,000 today. We are the largest local union of any international union in Washington State and a significant force in Montana. And I remember just a few short years ago, politicians and reporters down at the state capitol would joke, S-E-I who? Newspapers called us obscure and scrappy. One politician called caregivers perpetual pathetics. Well, today, there's only one word that politicians and the media use when they're talking about 775, and that word is powerful. But as we celebrate the tremendous accomplishments of the past decade and this past year, we do so against a backdrop of serious and ongoing economic crisis that is destroying the American dream for millions of workers. Because while SEIU nationally and SEIU 775 in particular have grown tremendously and helped raise the voices of caregivers and other low-wage workers across the country, what's happened to the rest of the economy and the rest of the labor movement is downright scary. Put simply, America is becoming a low-wage nation. Half a decade of recession has laid bare shocking inequality. Layoffs, wage cuts, regressive taxes, unemployment, and crushing debt have driven millions of Americans from the ranks of our once robust middle class. For the first time in American history, 90% of our children will live less prosperous lives than their parents, and 80% of workers will face poverty at some point in their life. So while we celebrate our remarkable successes as a union over the past year, we know that the labor movement is in crisis. Look at what's happening to collective bargaining. In the private sector, it's been cut in half since 1977, declining continuously for the past 50 years. Today, it stands at only 6.6%. Today, there are more American workers who have no legal right to form a union than there are union members. The crisis that working people face today began decades ago. It is the result of a relentless 40-year assault on the values and institutions that created widespread prosperity during much of the 20th century. Look at the map of the labor movement in the last 25 to 30 years. This is what we looked like in 1983. This is what we looked like in 2013. We are growing, we are shrinking in all 50 states, and we are growing in no states. Now, right-wing pundits and corporate apologists say that we're broke. They argue that the hardship that today's workers experience is the result of reckless social spending and our workers' inability to compete in a globalized marketplace. They assure us, despite all of the evidence, that if we give corporations and billionaires low tax rates and few regulations, that the market will reward those who work hard. But we know that the facts paint a different picture. Today, America is richer and more productive than ever, and our workers are among the hardest working in the world. The problem isn't that workers did anything wrong. The problem is that a handful of people got so greedy that it was no longer okay for all boats to rise together. A small group of powerful people on Wall Street and in banks and big corporations decided that they would only be happy if they could keep virtually all the nation's profit for themselves, rig the economy so that only they could win, and buy enough influence to get politicians to rewrite the rules in their favor. Let's just look at some facts. 60% of the jobs lost during the recession were middle-class jobs. But 59% of the jobs that we've added in the last 2 years have been low-wage jobs, most of which are in retail, fast food, or in caregiving. Today, the gap between the top 1% of income earners and the rest of us in America is at the highest point since the Great Depression, and greater than in any of our peer nations. When unions were strong in America between 1945 and the mid-1970s, America's increased economic growth was shared among all workers, roughly equally among the bottom 20%, the next 20%, the middle, the top, etc. But beginning in the late 1970s, though, as union strength began to decline, we saw inequality grow dramatically, with the lion's share of income going to the top 1%. One standard explanation for this upward redistribution of wealth is that globalization took away all the good manufacturing jobs. And, you know, there's some truth to that. Globalization caused job loss in manufacturing of clothing and electronic components, call centers, and some other manufacturing sectors. But it has nothing to do with declining or stagnant wages in sectors like retail or healthcare, hospitality, transportation, agriculture, construction, government, property services, and personal services. You can't export that stuff. And those jobs are increasingly low wage. Nor does our, here's an example. You know, globalization, we talked earlier about the airport workers. Globalization can't explain why in 1975 a jet fueler in SeaTac Airport earned the equivalent of $59,000 a year in today's wages with benefits and health, with pension and health benefits, but today earns just above the minimum wage. Now, nor was the shift in income distribution the result of declining productivity. In the late 1970s, this is what this chart shows, the link between productivity and workers' wages broke down. So while productivity grew by 69%, median hourly compensation only grew by 7%. So where did the proceeds from all that growth go? They went largely to the wealthiest people in the country. Over the past 40 years, our nation's economic, financial, employment, and tax policies have resulted in a dramatic upward shift of income and wealth as rules were rewritten to benefit the wealthy and the corporations. Today, median family income is actually lower than it was 30 years ago, even as the costs of housing, healthcare, and education have skyrocketed. So the vast majority of American families are living paycheck to paycheck. 1% of the US population now controls 43% of our nation's wealth. And when you break these numbers down, you also see a shocking racial disparity in wealth, with the typical Black or Latino household about 2 paychecks away from bankruptcy. But even college-educated white men, hardly anyone's idea of an oppressed class, have less earning power than they did in 1969. Retirement has become a luxury that most workers can't afford. Traditional defined benefit pensions now cover less than 5% of private sector workers. And so it's not a surprise that there's been a 172% increase in the amount of people working past the age of 75. Now, there's a persistent myth that when we talk about low-wage workers or minimum wage workers, that it's teenagers flipping burgers for pocket money, right? Not true. 77% of minimum wage earners are adults. 25% are over age 40, and 23% of fast food workers are moms. Now, 66% of them work for large, profitable corporations, not mom and pop stores. These companies have recovered from the recession. They're increasing their CEO pay. They're paying out billions of dividends to their shareholders. And if that's not bad enough, in 2009, a shockingly high 24% of American jobs were low wage. But by 2020, if current trends persist, 48% of all workers will be employed in low-wage jobs. And people often say, well, education is an answer. Now, this is a tough chart to read, but what it shows is that by 2020, 17 of the fastest-growing occupations will require a high school education or less. And meanwhile, for those who choose to go and seek higher education, they end up saddled with lifelong debt. There is now over $1 trillion of student loan debt in this country. It's tripled in the last 7 years alone, and $43 billion of it is held by people over the age of 60. And meanwhile, the nature of work is changing in the fastest growing sectors of our economy. The traditional employment relationship upon which most of our labor and employment laws are based is disappearing into a world of temporary, on-call, part-time, contingent, freelance, migrant, and casual work, which now makes up between a third and a half of all jobs. It all adds up to an attack on America's middle class and on the American dream. The same family that needed a single income to own a home and a car and send their kids to school in the 1970s now takes 2 or 3 incomes to live the same life. And the net economic impact of women doubling their workforce participation has been $0 in take-home pay for the bottom 90% of income-earning families. For me, sisters and brothers, this is a call to action. What this moment in our history means is that we have a truly awesome responsibility. Because if we think that someone else meeting in some other room, a president or a cabinet member or a CEO or a senator, has got a secret plan to save the American dream and revive the middle class, we are gravely mistaken. It's going to be up to us. Think about America's history. Now, we were hardly born into perfection. We had slavery and smallpox and short life expectancy, and only white men could vote. But we also had a dream of liberty and justice for all. And slowly, always through struggle, we passed along more liberty and more justice to each succeeding generation of Americans for 200 years. And because of the struggles of abolitionists and trade unionists and 8-hour-day activists, anti-sweatshop crusaders, immigrants, women suffragists, and civil rights leaders, we created a great nation, measured by the simple truth that for 200 years we could tell our children that they would grow up to have a more prosperous life than their parents. Many of you have heard me tell the story of my grandfather. He was born in Virginia in 1913, one of 13 siblings, and moved with his family to North Carolina and Kentucky by stagecoach. He left school after the 8th grade to work in a sawmill, where they'd hire you for a 10-hour shift, and if all the wood was cut after 9 hours, they'd lay you off without a paycheck. He rode boxcars around the country looking for work during the Great Depression, and when he finally got a job in a General Motors factory that he'd eventually retire from, it wasn't yet a great job. But it became a great job because he joined the United Auto Workers Union, and with his co-workers, he gained the power to force what was then the world's largest company to say yes when it wanted to say no. Their wages rose faster than inflation. They gained health care and pensions. My grandfather, born into poverty, retired as a member of the great American middle class, not because of something someone else did for him, but because of what he and his co-workers did for themselves by organizing. And so, things changed things got better. There was more liberty. There was more justice. Until about 40 years ago. That's when a handful of fantastically wealthy individuals and corporations decided they'd have enough of this American dream being broadly shared and decided instead that they'd create a politics and an economy that only worked for the 1%. Today, as much as many of us might want to turn back the clock to that economy of the 50s or 60s or 70s, there's actually no way out of this but forward. But we can learn important lessons from our history, and I want to talk about 4 in particular. The last time the labor movement was almost dead in America was the early 1930s. The New York Times even published an obituary for unions in the year 1930. But by 1935, labor unions were growing fast, and by 1950, we represented almost 4 out of every 10 American workers, helping give rise to the middle class for people like my grandfather. Now, how did that happen? First, smart and strategic labor leaders like John L. Lewis of the United Mine Workers realized they couldn't use old organizing models which relied on protecting the economic privilege of skilled white male craftsmen as the only way to lift up workers. Instead, they invested millions of dollars and all of their unions' top talent in building new industrial unions that were racially integrated, that mirrored the industrial structure of the economy, and that aimed to lift up all workers, not just those with specialized skills. Through sit-down strikes and company-wide walkouts, they gained the strength to shut down industrial production and force changes to labor law. The result, of course, was the birth of the American middle class, the creation of institutions, unions, by which ordinary people won a seat at the table in the halls of government and industry, and the longest period of uninterrupted economic growth and prosperity in our nation's history. Now, of course, it wasn't only unions that did that. It took businesses willing to sit at the table and negotiate. It took government willing to use its power to stabilize a rocky industrial economy. But if unions had made a different set of decisions in the 1930s, none of that would have been possible. If they had turned inwards, become defensive, protected old rituals and standards, and only fought on behalf of their current members, tens of millions of Americans would have lived measurably worse lives for decades to come. So I think there are 4 key lessons from that era for today. The first is about innovation. John L. Lewis and the labor leaders of his generation dared to break out of their old and comfortable models and embrace a newer, edgier way of organizing, and to make a massive reallocation of talent and financial resources away from their institutions into new ones. If you think about it, it's not totally unlike what Steve Jobs did at Apple. Today's innovations won't look the same as those of the 20th century. In the 21st century, we need new models of worker power that fit a globalized, outsourced, mobile, networked, and disaggregated economy. We may not know what those models look like yet, but we know they won't be discovered by accident, and that only through risk and experimentation will we be able to find them. The second lesson is about disruption. There's simply no other way to create the kind of power it takes to win. By being able to disrupt industrial production through industry-wide and company-wide strikes in the 20th century, worker organizations reset economic power relations for decades to come. Now, today's disruptions won't look the same as those of the last century. The power of the industrial strike has faded with the global mobility of capital and labor, and with the legal limitations on many of the most effective union tactics. Whether they're efforts at building worker-owned businesses that compete in the marketplace, globalized networks of pro-worker campaigners that use the power of the information age to bring down unethical employers, or geographically based campaigns targeting specific industries, the time is now for us to discover new ways of disrupting the ugly economic status quo. The third lesson is about turning outward, not facing inward. Movements that embrace the world, that take risks and experiments, and that focus on an outward-facing mission, not exclusively on today's members or constituents, are the ones that succeed in the long run. Movements that lock themselves away for fear of change or the unknown inevitably die or become irrelevant. And the fourth lesson is about the relationship between social movements and governments. Politicians and governments react to the way the wind is blowing. They respond to social movements, they don't make them. And social movements are built based on bold, inspirational, moral demands, not on being patient or incremental or following the counsel of those already in power. So today, as workers face an economy that is bleaker than any since the 1930s, I believe that this movement calls for us to innovate, to disrupt, to face outward and not just inwardly, and to build movements based on bold moral demands. And let the politicians catch up later. Which brings us back here to our convention. Because, as I mentioned before, as part of our celebration of our 10th formal anniversary last year, our executive board created a Vision 2022 committee charged with reviewing the first 10 years of our history and strategizing the next 10 years, chaired by our Vice President, Sterling Harders. We specifically asked the committee to review the mission, vision, values, goals, strategies, and constitution and bylaws of our local, and to be willing to take a look back at the first 10 years and make recommendations for the next 10 years to come. They were charged with examining the great unwinding of prosperity in today's economy, the changing nature of work, future trends, the state of the labor movement, and American labor law. In 25 meetings of the committee and its 3 subcommittees spanning 7 months, they wrestled with some of the most difficult issues facing workers today. The recommendations of the committee are revolutionary and groundbreaking. In essence, they imagine a repurposing of our local union toward a broader economic justice mission, towards innovation, disruption, facing outward, and movement building. They propose 4 new high-level goals for our union. First, lifting all caregivers out of poverty. Despite impressive gains in our contract, the woeful fact remains that for most caregivers, entering the profession requires a vow of poverty. That is as morally wrong as it is economically unsustainable, as the aging of the baby boom generation will soon cause a nearly tripling of demand for long-term care. Relying on a low-wage, high-turnover workforce to care for the most vulnerable seniors and people with disabilities isn't right, and it isn't practical. The committee report calls on us to commit ourselves to lifting all caregivers out of poverty within this generation. Second, building powerful, scalable, and sustainable worker organizations. What unions did so well in the 20th century was change workers' lives for the better, touching tens of millions of workers at a time to create a broad middle class and sustaining strong organizations that could survive even during an economic downturn or in periods of political disfavor. That's the essence of what workers need in the 21st century too. But we may need brand new tools to achieve those objectives. And those tools might not be called unions or contracts or collective bargaining. The committee report calls on us to embrace new models of building scalable and sustainable power for all workers, not just for union members and not just for workers in our own industries and geographies. Third, transforming healthcare and long-term care. Too often in the past, unions like my grandfather's UAW or my mother's teachers union were indifferent to or even hostile to improving the quality of the products and services their members made and provided. That's a mistake we will not make. Under the Affordable Care Act, our members have an opportunity to remake their skills and contribute more to the health outcomes and independence of the people we serve. The committee report calls on us to be the change agents in our own industry and to lead the quality revolution in integrated healthcare delivery. Fourth, increasing prosperity and decreasing inequality for all working people. Now, this is the boldest and most audacious goal, one where leadership is most sorely needed. And just sisters and brothers, as previous generations were called on to build social movements for the abolition of slavery, the 8-hour day, women's rights, civil rights, and the environment, the most important challenge of our time is rising income inequality and a future that, if unchecked, will leave most workers with high levels of poverty, no ladder into the middle class, and no share in the prosperity they help create. The committee report calls on us again to broaden our mission from members and our industry to achieving justice for all working people. Now, this path, if we choose it, will not be easy. It will not be without risk. It will not be without mistakes and failure. It will not be without controversy. It is bold and audacious to suggest that a single local union tucked away in the upper left corner of the U.S. lead the way and repurpose itself away from traditions and tools that are nearly a century old and towards an uncertain and unknown future, towards innovation and experimentation. I know we didn't ask for this. It wasn't our fault that we were born and assumed leadership at this precise moment in our nation's history when the economic future was in the highest level of doubt. But sisters and brothers, it will absolutely be our fault if we don't rise to the occasion and do something about it. Thank you. Now, someday, 100 years from now, say, a lot of things that seem awfully important today won't even be remembered. The names of most of our current politicians and celebrities, much less of union leaders, will probably not make it into the history books of the future and will fade from our collective memory. What will be remembered is whether ordinary people banded together to accomplish extraordinary things by imagining the unimaginable and daring to speak truth to power. What will be remembered is whether some group of daring souls stood up for a future of broadly shared prosperity for workers, economic justice for all, and an economy that grows from the middle out. What will be remembered is whether anyone innovated, disrupted, experimented, and embraced risk to challenge the status quo. And what will be remembered most of all is when the American dream and the American middle class faced their darkest hour and were at their greatest level of risk, whether or not some bold and courageous group of working people took up the challenge of fighting back, of never backing down, and of raising every voice for a different future. Now, if we adopt the report of the Vision 2022 committee tomorrow, sisters and brothers, that's the path we're starting out on. And if there's one organization in the country as bold and audacious to have even a chance at sparking that next American revolution, I know from all we've struggled with and all we've won over the years, that organization is SEIU 775. Thank you so much.